Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to my fourth episode of the Real Talk podcast. In this episode, I will be talking about um, the studs and duds for Washington this season now that their season has come to a close. Um, what is next? What my view on the season so far. Um, or my views on the season that just wrapped up, what they need to do to improve. And also for Real Madrid topics, we have breaking news regarding players who are going out on loan, Gareth Bale's potential return and his potential of going out and no longer being a Zinedine Zidane issue, along with um, transfer rumor raiders with Kylian Mbappe and others. So stay tuned. This is going to be a fun episode. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will see you guys here in a few seconds. Enjoy the episode, guys. So I want to kick this episode off with my opinion on the studs and duds for Washington now that the season is now over. I know that I did a studs and duds video or clip if you're watching this on if you're listening to this on Anchor. But if you are watching this on YouTube, I did a studs and duds video um, last time. But I would like to, now that the season is over, go over a lot more studs and duds in my opinion, break them down, their performances, what they, disappointed in and stuff like that. So I would like to start with the duds, and the duds are Dwayne Haskins. The first dud on my list, Dwayne Haskins. It's well documented. The coaching staff didn't want him. He was drafted by the previous regime, and even the previous regime didn't want him. And this coaching staff was willing to give him his shot at starting. Led that incredible comeback against Philadelphia in week 1. Had that impressive pep talk in the locker room when they were down 17-0. But then after that, he just stinked it up. Just was god awful. Ron Rivera wised up after the Ravens game. He bragged about having to lose. He lost the game. He bragged about it, and he bragged about having 300 yards. And not being able to mature, cost him his starting job. So he was relegated not to backup, but to third string. And that was given. Starting job was given to Kyle Allen. So on and so forth. But then, Alex Smith goes down with injury, because Alex Smith had an incredible comeback this year, and more on him later, in later segments or later videos if you guys are watching this either on YouTube or on, more on him later is what I'm going to say. Alex Smith gets hurt, Dwayne Haskins is gifted a second chance to prove himself, and he played okay in the Seattle game. He did have those few interceptions, but he played okay. He wasn't the sole reason why Washington lost that game. But then, the next day, that night after the game, he's out, partying with strippers or whatever, going to strip clubs maskless. And then, of course, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. It's unbecoming on me." He's stripped of his captaincy. He goes in, and for the next game against the Panthers, and he just trashed it. He just trashed the game, and he all the apologies and all the punishment, being stripped of the captaincy, wasn't enough, because next thing you know, he gets released. So he has been, one of Washington's biggest disappointments. I'm glad that, that Washington finally, just cut him loose. Now we just got to see what happens with the quarterback position. And like I said, I would like to go over that in a later episode, later segments, or whatever, what have you. So I will definitely talk about that. Now that the Washington season's over, there's going to be a lot of more Washington season in review clips, videos, episodes and stuff like that. So I look forward for that. Let me know what you guys think. Next, Troy Apke. Oh boy, or Trashke. This is gonna be brief, just because unfortunately, people overhype guys way too much. And that's what happened. Unfortunately, it was last year, 2020, was not kind to anyone and everyone. It was pandemic. A lot of social injustice and stuff like that. But the pandemic caused a lot of things to happen in the world of sports. A lot of, NBA was postponed. NFL had to handle a lot of things differently. The NFL didn't have any preseason, so they had to do an abbreviated training camp. And the bad thing is that, Troy, or the thing was, not the bad thing, but the real thing was that Troy Apke, he showed that he showed his potential during training camp. And, he was, again, given his talent that he showed in training camp, given the starting job. And that was a big mistake, because he kept on getting burned in coverage, couldn't tackle to save his life. Everyone just ran past him. He couldn't, like I said, dropped interceptions, fumbles, kept on getting burned, like I said. So that was the next dud for me. And then, DeSager Everett, who I will be talking about later. Even Jeremy Reeves, man, oh man, stepped up where Troy Apke couldn't. So, that was the next dud. Dustin Hopkins, I have as a dud. And you're going to say, well, he was never good to begin with, never made clutch kicks. But this year he just showed it that Washington needs to keep their options open with kickers. He was responsible for a lot of games. The Detroit game comes to mind. The New York Giants game, the first game with the New York Giants comes to mind, because, like I said, if he makes the extra point, if he makes a field goal or an extra point, was it an extra point? Let me see. I think it was a field goal. Yeah, it was a field goal. If he makes that field goal earlier in the game, Ron Rivera wouldn't have to go for 2 points. Have the trust factor, forcing Ron Rivera to go for 2 to win the game. It would have been either tied, or they would have had a 23-20 lead and forced New York to come back and win the game. So that is the main reason. Of course, it's well documented, the Seattle game. He did have decent games here and there, but just missed way too many field goals and extra points for my liking. And I think it's time for Washington to move on. Next dud, Steven Sims. And you're going to say, well, you're not giving him a fair chance. I am, because he was, this receiving core, other than Terry McLaurin, and of course I'm going to, talk about others in the receiving core later, just, dropped a lot of passes. And, Steven Sims, key plays, couldn't hang on, got injured, really didn't do anything of note. So, he goes, he's a dud in my opinion. He disappointed, and a lot of fans saw what he did last year and picked him to be, a standout or a breakout guy. But no, he's on my duds list. I don't know if he's going to be on other people's dud list, but he's definitely on mine. So next up, Geron Christian, is another dud. Was given the left tackle starting position, but just played terrible at the position. Was a turntable, couldn't, block, couldn't do anything. And then, Ron Rivera had to make changes to the offensive line, giving others a chance, like Cornelius Lucas and Wes Schweitzer and all that and all those guys a chance. But like I said, more on those guys later. I have them on my studs list. To segue into the studs list, though, I'm just gonna go over not duds per se, but disappointments. And I hope to see them, develop and improve. Sadiq Charles is one. I just hope, Sadiq Charles, was drafted with our fourth pick that we picked up. Trent Williams was traded to the 49ers, and that's, who we used the fourth round pick on, I think it was. Yeah, it was for him. He was supposed to be Trent Williams' replacement, but just, the injury bug, cost him a lot of things. He got injured the second play of a game. I can't remember what game it was where he ended up, getting hurt. I think it was the Dallas game. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. He was a disappointment. Antonio Gandy Golden is another guy. We were thin at the wide receiver position. And, Antonio Gandy Golden, you're going to say he's from a smaller school, Liberty and stuff like that. But, this was the chance, with our wide receiver core being thin, given the chance. In my opinion, though, this year, he wasn't given the fair chance. He was also injured. Dontrell Inman in the world, Cam Sims, and others, were given chances ahead of him. So, I can't blame him for that. But, I really hope to see him more in the future. So those are just a few guys that really disappointed this year. Weren't duds per se, just disappointed. So let's get into the studs. And the number one stud I have is Taylor Heinicke. And hear me out. You're going to say, well, he only played one game and he only played 7 minutes. But trust me, if it was Alex Smith in that game, in that playoff game with Tampa Bay, Washington probably would have had no chance. It probably, I predicted 27-14, 31, 27-14, 31-14. And if Alex Smith would have played, I think it would have been that. Taylor Heinicke gave Washington the best chance to win with his legs, with his accuracy. He did have that one interception, but it wasn't his fault. That was a tip pass. But, he, for the one game that he played, proved to be a stud. He carried the team on his back. He even, he got hurt during the game. And he was able to come back and lead Washington to a scoring drive, off that injury. So, he's a stud for that just one game. I'm giving him the honorary stud title for that game. Next stud, Cornelius Lucas and Wes Schweitzer. Like I said, Ron Rivera really did not impress at all with his free agent signings his first year. And I'm going to do separate videos and separate clips and separate episodes on what Ron Rivera should do heading into free agency and stuff like that. Later down the road. But, Cornelius Lucas and Wes Schweitzer were guys that stepped up this year due to the fact that the offensive line wasn't, they played okay and okay enough for the offense to function. Unlike, like I said, Wes Martin and Jerron Christian, who were given the starting jobs. Next stud, Logan Thomas. And Logan Thomas is a stud for the reason why a lot of, Washington's tight end group was weak heading into the season. It was bad. We had, Logan Thomas, and then who was after Logan Thomas? It was Hale Hedges, Thaddeus Moss, who didn't even make the roster, the butter hands of Jeremy Sprinkle, Richard Rodgers. Our tight end group was not that good, and we thought that Logan Thomas would, just be a dud. He was new to the position, but to surprise, he had a few touchdowns, impressed with big games here and there. So he is a stud with the way that he, was able to show that he can be a tight end one, or maybe if Washington makes us another signing for another tight end or for agency, a tight end number 2. but he has shown to be a tight end in the league this year. Next stud, Cam Sims. And hear me out. You're going to say, well, he had dropped passes. Why are you not getting on his case? But here's the thing. Washington didn't have a wide receiver number 2. Washington didn't. It was Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, and then who else? Cam Sims stepped up, had a few big games. Alex Smith and Taylor Heinicke particularly liked throwing to him. So he was a makeshift number 2, and he's a stud for that one reason. He stepped up where he needed to step up. He did have a key drops, and fans like me and others, were disappointed with those drops, but he stepped up when needed. So he's a stud in my opinion. Next, couple of studs, Cole Holcomb and Tim Settle. Washington's linebacking core for Cole Holcomb's, Washington's linebacking core was garbage. John Bostic, Sean Dion Hamilton. Just the linebacking core wasn't all that good. Excuse me. But Cole Holcomb was able to step up and, had a huge, the game that sticks out to me is the Dallas game. Made his presence felt, was hitting hard, hitting fast, was responsible for an interception in the red zone against Dallas. So, he is a stud in my opinion. Tim Settle is another stud. For one reason only. Well, for a couple of reasons. He had 6 sacks this year, 5.5 sacks to 6 sacks this year, and he wasn't gonna be given a chance. Matt Ioannidis gets hurt week 2 of the season, and then Tim Settle steps up, and he stepped up in a big way. They called him the Penguin with his little dance, but he played big in big games. Had back-to-back games with sacks. Stepped up when needed. Next stud, Cameron Curl. And, I'm going to preface this with this. Landon Collins was given the starting gig, and he was getting burnt so many times. He, was very bad in coverage. But then in the Dallas game, where he got hurt, may I add, in the first Dallas game, may I add, tore his, what was it? It wasn't his ACL. It was his Achilles. Tore his Achilles, and then a lot of fans were like, "Oh, time to sign Earl Thomas and stuff like that." But no, they signed Cameron. Not signed Cameron Curl. Cameron Curl, the 7th-round draft pick, stepped up. Yes, he he needs to get better in coverage, but he was a hard hitter. He tackled, something that Landon Collins couldn't do at all. But he was able to tackle, had a few interceptions, had a huge interception in the Eagles game. He had interceptions in key moments. So he is another stud in my opinion. Last few studs would be Ronald Darby, and he is a stud because other than Kendall Fuller, our cornerback room also was kind of lacking in the talent department. And when we signed Ronald Darby, I personally was like, oh no, this guy, he was washed up in, he showed to be washed up in Philly. He kept on getting burned in Philly. He kept on, getting hurt in Philly. But then, he comes here to Washington and he rejuvenates his career. I hope that he gets re-signed to a new deal, to be honest. He impressed so far this season. He did get burned here and there, but made key plays in certain games. So he is a stud in my opinion. And the final stud would be DeSazier Everett. Like I said earlier, Troy Apke was garbage, and we didn't have many players at the free safety position. And DeSazier Everett had to move from special teams to a full-time starter because of Troy Apke's horrible play. So, he is a stud for that reason. You know, he did way better than Troy Apke. So that is my studs and duds segment, guys. Next up, I'm going to be talking about the year in review, breaking down my thoughts on what went down during the season. Going over my predictions from earlier in the year, and if I was right, wrong. If you guys watched that video, you know that I was right. But if you don't look out for it. Next segment, guys.